Well, greetings and salutations, everyone. I hope everyone is still doing well, and welcome to tonight's second half. Before we jump into it, a couple quick links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. The merch is displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman, Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It does not cost a cent. Click the like button. It takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click the bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. They definitely do matter, and they are appreciated. And with that, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump into tonight's second half, shall we? Today's first encounter. So, let me describe the woods that I like to hang out in. They're about a half a mile long and 150 yards thick between some houses and a not very busy road. Sometimes I feel like something's watching me out here, but I've never had a weird experience up until now. Anyway, I'll get into it. Over last weekend, I wasn't in the woods, as I had some work, and I was overall just too busy to go and spend some alone time out there. Anyway, last Monday, I walked into my little camp, and I found it trashed. A makeshift bench I had made was wrenched apart. It was nailed together. A sign and signpost saying camp was cast over 15 feet from where it stood. An entire wall of the cabin I made was torn down, and some guidelines holding up the tarp on top seemed to be ripped apart. There was no storm over the weekend, just a little rain, if I remember correctly. Strange, I thought, but maybe some teenagers or a neighbor decided to vent some frustrations by wrecking the camp. The damage wasn't that bad, and I ended up fixing everything. Anyway, a couple days ago, I was splitting some wood and carving it into pieces for a game I play with some of my friends. I decided to take a break and text one of my friends for a bit. We talked about the woods, and I tell him that these woods are totally not scary, and I feel safe here. Just as I press send, about 50 yards behind me, hidden behind a hill, I hear a terrible scream, and it's not a fox scream, I've heard those. Not a human, but more like a woman being murdered, crossed with a car screeching to a halt. But not either of those. I turn around and grab the knife off of my belt and think this is strange. Just as I tell my friend that, I wasn't afraid, I hear the scream. I proceeded to get up and steadily walk out of those woods, and I haven't been back since. Today's second encounter. My family and I went to a park where we've been going to for about 20 years. It's quite big, but still, one day we came across a part of it where the meadows usually continued, yet all of a sudden a part of the forest was there. We were at first wondering what happened, then shrugged it off and went down, going towards it. Then went inside of it. It was pretty dark in there, for being an afternoon in autumn, and kind of weird. There was almost no wind. It was silent. There was a part where the light came through, a bit dim, yet kind of open. I looked around, and the ground was black, the soil. And it was all just so surreal between most of the tree roots and old crimson-red bricks. They all looked pretty weathered. The forest was at least, from the looks of it, 100 years old, if not older. Well, and now we come to the rather weird and more uncanny part. We were standing around looking, wondering why we've never seen this part of the forest before, which wasn't big either. Then it got strange, very dim, completely no wind and stuffy. It was like something was in the air, giving us goosebumps. I heard a voice which told me to leave. Get out now. I told them, and we went out as soon as possible. The next time we came to this place, it was probably a month later. The power lines, before the start, next to the road, were still there, but the forest, it was gone, like it was never there in the first place. The grass looked like the rest of the meadows, like it truly was never there. To this day, my family and I wondered what happened on that day. I've had paranormal encounters before, yet smaller ones, but later, like 2009, 2010, and more recent as well, but never something like a piece of forest just popping up out of nowhere and then vanishing, like it was never there in the first place. Today's third encounter. So my friend, we'll call her Jay, was over late last night, and we had been talking about paranormal experiences, and I brought up the subject Dogman. She had never heard of a Dogman, so I put YouTube on and showed her a couple of videos where an unknown creature was filmed digging in a cemetery. When she saw this creature in that video, she gasped and said, "Oh my God, I wonder if that's what I saw." I paused it, and I was like, what? You've seen something like this and you never told me. She said she basically saw two of these things about 5 years ago on her property, and never brought it up because who'd believe her? I asked her to tell me every detail, and I was careful to ask questions that did not lead her in any way. I'm familiar with what most witnesses see, and lo and behold, every answer she gave matched what others have seen. The location was Leonard, Michigan, a pretty rural area with lots of woods and wildlife. Her and her family have a few acres and raise chickens and ducks as a hobby. Her house is on a dirt road and is surrounded by a lot of wooded area. I will type out the conversation as accurately as I can, and will also have my friend proofread this before sharing. Jay. This was about 5 years ago when my dog was a young puppy. My sister and I took her to go outside. It was dusk, getting dark, but still plenty of light to see. The pup noticed something and started to slowly walk towards it. We looked to see what she was seeing, and to our shock, there were two huge dogs/wolves on the property about 100 feet away from where we were standing on the porch. Instinctively, I took a few steps forward and scooped up my puppy. My sister and I stared at them. They were on all fours, hunched over, eating something. They lifted their heads up to look at us, but seemed unbothered and went back to whatever they were eating. My first thought was I was curious, and I wanted to know what we were looking at, and I wanted to get a closer look. But that thought was quickly replaced by the realization that this is not safe, and I slowly walked backwards, as well as my sister. And we went back inside. We locked the doors and windows and asked each other what the hell those things were. We watched them from the window. They eventually left in no apparent hurry. I've kind of put that experience out of my mind and almost forgot about it up until now. Me. Did you feel scared or threatened? Jay. Not necessarily because of their size and how wrong they looked. I felt they could be dangerous, but they never snarled or showed their teeth or did anything aggressive to scare us. Me. How was your puppy acting? Jay. She probably was too young to realize they could be dangerous. She seemed curious. Me. What did they look like? Color, size? Jay. One was a dark color, maybe black. The other was a lighter color, like a light brown or tan. They were bigger than any dog we know exists, bigger than a mastiff even. If they were to be on their hind feet, they would definitely be much taller than you and I. Probably 7 feet or taller is my best guess. Me. What did their fur look like? Was it short or long? Jay. Looks at my pit. Definitely not short like your pit. Looks at my Icelandic sheepdog. Their fur was longer, like hers, like a wolf or a German shepherd. Me. Were there any spots on them where the fur was thicker or thinner? Jay. They had thicker fur around their necks, like a poofy small mane. Me. What did their ears look like? J. They were up and pointed like a wolf's. At this point, I'm totally freaking out at how accurately she is describing what others have seen. Me. Okay, so far, you could be just describing large wolves. But you said they looked wrong. So what about them made you think they were not wolves? Did they ever stand or walk on two legs? J. No, they were on all fours, but their anatomy wasn't right. While they were hunched over eating, their shoulders were much higher than their rear ends. They did not look like a normal dog or a wolf would look, bent forward. Like their front arms were way too long, much longer than their rear legs. And how they were eating was weird. They were almost using their front paws to help them tear apart whatever they were eating and bringing it closer to their mouths. Like they had hands? Me. Could you see if they had hands, or did they look like dog paws? J. Honestly, I couldn't tell. But what kind of dog or wolf uses paws to bring their food to their mouth? The way they moved it was like they really had hands, and that's what really freaked me out. Now I'm totally losing my crap, jumping up and down excited and saying, oh my God, they are real, I knew it. Me. Could you see any genitalia? Weird thing to ask, I know, but I'm curious. J. No, nothing obvious. Me. What did their hind legs look like? Were they straight like a person's, or did they have a backwards bend like a dog? Like a dog's. J. Me. What did their tails look like? J. Pauses for a while. I can see her thinking. She gets a look of realization. They didn't have tails. Oh my God. That's what really scared me. When they walked away, I remember thinking, oh my God, they don't have tails. Me. What did you conclude that they were? J. I didn't. I was freaked out. I had no explanation. My guess was some type of genetically altered wolf or a werewolf. Me. I would have been obsessed with finding answers if I had seen this. Why did you just put it out of your mind? J. I don't have a clue. Maybe because I couldn't come up with a logical explanation. It was too weird and scary to think about. On a side note, later that same week, her boyfriend happened to look out the window on the second story and saw a huge white dog in the field near their house. He says he remembered thinking that it's a massive dog and that he had never seen it before. Being in a rural area, they know most of the neighbors' dogs and strays are not common. He didn't give it too much thought, but as we were discussing her sighting, he brought it up. I asked her if they found any evidence of what they had been eating or any tracks. The next day they did go out where they saw the creatures, and they did find one large canine paw print. I asked her if they took a photo, and she said she thinks they did, but can't remember if it was on her phone or her sister's. Whatever they had been eating was completely devoured, or they either took the remains with them when they left. As she thought more about it, she remembered that her family had, in fact, had a few of their chickens and ducks go missing around that time. But given that they are birds, and they free range, and there are normal predators in the area, it was not overly shocking at the time. She left pretty late, planning to talk to her sister about it soon, to see what she remembers. I told her not to lead her for answers, and to see if everything matches what she remembers. I'm really happy she's taking this seriously. She Google searched and found one image that closely resembles what she saw. However, the creature in the artwork has a tail. Well, what she saw did not have a tail. She ended up talking to her sister about it, and her sister said she didn't have the clearest recollection of them. When she brought up Dogman, her sister actually said she had heard of Dogman online and stopped and said, "Dude, maybe that's what we saw." One interesting thing that her sister did remember was that she thought they were eating a carcass of a duck or a chicken, but their conversation was brief, and I would love to talk to her sister sometime soon to ask my own questions. A little disclaimer, she is an honest person, very down-to-earth and genuine. She has never given me reason to doubt her. She's not an alcoholic or a drug user, and she's never been one to make up wild claims or make things up for attention. I do believe her experience wholeheartedly, And for me, there is no doubt in my mind that Dogman is, in fact, real. Today's fourth experience. Here's a weird experience that happened to me. I'm not super into cryptids, but I've experienced enough strange stuff in the woods to make me think about this twice. Some people are saying that this is classic Dogman behavior. I don't know what was behind these experiences, but they are very real. About a half an hour from my house in a state forest, there's some backpacking shelters that you can rent. It's like a single group campsite with a crude cabin with no door, a fire ring, and a single pit toilet outhouse. They're in the middle of nowhere, several miles apart, not like a campground at all, very secluded. There are 5 sites on a 32-mile trail. About 15 to 20 years ago, my parents' friends were staying out there partying for a few days. My mom, dad, dog, and I hiked out there for a day trip to visit. I was a kid, maybe 12 or so. I was hiking the trails around the campsite with my dog. I heard a very distinct cry for help. From the single "help me," but loud, plain as day, it echoed off the hill. It was real. It was a soft tone, a higher pitched voice. Either a woman or an older child. I didn't hesitate. I started running toward the voice with my dog. Bad idea. I should have grabbed an adult. We were cresting the hill, and this voice was so loud that I anticipated seeing a person in need of help as soon as we got to the top of the hill and looked down. My dog was starting to act weird as we frantically searched for almost a half an hour and came up empty-handed. Nothing. Nobody about. My dog was very reluctant to continue further, and we turned around. This is a large border collie husky mix. She was really intelligent and protective of me as a child. She started to lag behind me rather than lead on a leash. I was starting to have to coax her forward a little by tugging the lead. I told my parents and the other adults at camp, and they just kind of laughed it off. I was distraught for the rest of the day. I will add that the adults were the better part of a mile away, and this noise was coming from the opposite direction of camp. Fast forward a couple decades later to last year, I'm solo backpacking, in which I do a lot. I decided to rent that very same spot for myself. It was the halfway destination and a place to sleep on a 15-mile round trip. Things were going well. I made camp, fired up the single-burner stove. It was dark, almost time for bed. I'm enjoying my delicious sodium-laden ramen noodle, when all of a sudden an uneasy feeling abruptly comes over me. A feeling I've never really had before, and I cannot fully describe. My body tensed up, I got cold, my hair stood up on the back of my neck. And right then and there, I needed to leave. I don't know why, I just had to. I did not have time to properly pack. I half-assed started stuffing my gear back into my pack. Then my LED headlamp with relatively fresh, or so I thought, batteries died. There was absolutely no moon. It's dark, very dark. I pulled out my tiny 50 lumen Streamlight style pen light from my pocket and finished packing. I had a large heavy-duty contractor garbage bag that I always kept packed away for use to make a makeshift rain poncho or what else. I finished stuffing my tent and sleeping bag into the garbage bag. I hustled out of the woods with my poorly organized pack on my back and my garbage bag of belongings over my shoulder. Strange thing about this experience was it wasn't quiet in the woods when things got weird. I could hear a pack of coyote yipping, or so I thought, going nuts in the distance when I was hiking out, but nothing else really. Here I am, a grown-ass man who considers himself a proficient outdoorsman, sprinting out of the woods. For what? From what? The dark? As a legal permit holder, I always carry a sidearm when doing long solo trips in the woods. My hand was hovering around the holster the whole way back. I made it to the car in serious record time, loaded up, and sped off. It took me a while to shake that feeling. On the way back, I did get lost, but Google Maps helped me backtrack to the fork in the trail. I completely 100% forgot about that voice calling for help incident at that very spot a decade or so earlier. Then it hit me at once. I got home, started to unpack in the middle of the night. I remembered that voice, looking for the person screaming for help, my dog and I. I started to get knots in my stomach. For reasons I cannot explain, it all kind of started to make sense to me, like there was some sort of correlation. I don't venture into that area anymore unless I'm with other people. Something strange is or was out there, or something really bad happened there in the past. I know this experience isn't that crazy, but most of the real ones are not. I looked online into missing persons or whatever and didn't come up with anything significant. There have been a couple of murders, but those predated my experience by at least 10 years or so, and although they were in the same state land, they were not what I would consider nearby. Perhaps something was attempting to lure me as a kid. That same thing was enough to tip me off as an adult. Maybe I was just a dumb kid with an overactive imagination. Maybe as an adult the stress of life got to me as I was left to my thoughts in the wilderness, and I had a panic attack. Who knows, really? Oh yeah, and this was in the Great Lakes region of North America. Today's fifth encounter. I regularly visited my grandfather where he lived in Wisconsin. His home was surrounded by trees and located in an area where heavy woods were normal. He lived by himself, and it cheered him up when I'd go and see him. Then out of nowhere, I heard he was selling the home and moving. That did not make any sense to me. He loved that house. The location was great, up in the woods, just like he wanted after he retired. I wanted to go see him there one last time before he sold it, but he didn't want me to. He wouldn't even let me visit. That never happened before. In the past, he always welcomed my visits. I got him to change his mind, but it was not easy. Nothing that was going on made any sense to me. On the visit, I noticed he had changed. He wasn't relaxed like he used to be. I wasn't a kid anymore. I was old enough to travel by myself, but he wouldn't let me go outside of the house alone. There was a fence now, and he had installed floodlights. During the evenings, he couldn't take it easy. He would go and check every little noise or look out the windows a lot, and he always kept a loaded shotgun with him or near him at all times. He never did that before. The atmosphere at his house was totally changed, and how it used to be. He and I were close and had a very good relationship. In fact, I was closer to him than anyone else. That's why he told me what happened when I asked him what was going on. What he told me was something I have never forgot. I have never told anyone what he said before. This is the first time that I am sharing it. He used to go fishing at a location out in the woods. It was his favorite thing to do. The best part about it was how close it was. He didn't have to drive. He could just walk through the woods and go fishing whenever he wanted. It was that convenient. He was on his way one day going through the trail in the woods to get there when he came across a huge creature that had black fur and big, heavy muscles. It was standing down the trail some distance from him. It had the head of a wolf, and it stood on its hind legs. Being in its hind legs made it look over 8 feet tall. It had its nose up in the air like it was sniffing around, and then it stopped moving. Suddenly it snapped its head and looked directly at my grandfather. When my grandfather first saw it, it scared him. He was froze with fear and confused by what he was looking at. When it suddenly snapped its head and looked at him in a way, it looked angry. My grandfather felt the deepest fear he had ever felt in his entire life. Still frozen with fear and standing there staring at this creature when it started running toward him. When my grandfather saw this, he dropped everything, his prized fishing gear and other stuff, and ran home as fast as he could. Now he hadn't moved like that in years, so it caused him some pain. He had a hard time, but he had motivation. There was a lot of noise behind him while he ran through the woods. He looked back over his shoulder one time and saw it behind him. It was chasing him. After that, he ran the rest of the way home without looking back again. He made it, but lost everything he had dropped. Even though it cost him plenty of money to buy it all in the first place, he never went back for any of it. The creature scared him so much. But it didn't end there. That same night that it chased him, it started coming to his house. Noises on the roof or outside of the house woke him up. Sometimes he'd see a huge shape moving around outside in the dark. It was in the dark, but he knew what it was. Getting the floodlights made a big difference, but he knew it still come by. He stopped hearing the noises on the roof and didn't see it come close to the house. But there were noises like things hitting the house, like they were being thrown. And he'd see it watching him from the trees at night sometimes. If there were noises, he would look out one of the windows and find eyeshine showing up more or less in the same area of trees each time on the property. The eyes were always at a point high above the ground. I didn't see the eyes during my visit, but I never forgot how upset my grandfather looked and sounded when he told me what had happened. He shook the whole time he was telling me, and had to stop talking about it sometimes. He couldn't tell me all of it in one go. It scared him so much that he needed to take breaks while telling me. It was like it was happening to him that day. After that day he first saw it, my grandfather never went fishing again. He also stayed out of the woods as best as he could. What happened to him scared him so much that it changed the way he lived and made him give up his home. Tonight's final encounter. It was 1988. I was driving through Tennessee at the time, taking what I thought would be a shortcut through a rural area and possibly through a more scenic route through the state. Unfortunately, along the way, a rear tire on the left side of my car blew out while I was basically in the middle of nowhere. This was a time before cell phones. It wouldn't have been possible to call for help. Not in the way cell phones make it so easy now, but I was prepared. I knew how to change a tire myself, and I had a spare, so I started working on it. After some time I finished changing the tire. I was still on the ground and didn't have a chance to put all the tools away yet, when I heard a lot of strange and rapid noises on the road, some way back on the part of the road I had drove through earlier, after the tire blew out and while I was still stopping the car. I turned my head just in time to see something large disappear into the trees off the side of the road. It was completely unexpected to see something that large, and I wasn't sure what it was, because I mostly missed seeing it in time. With the way it ran so fast, if I didn't look in the direction of the noises when I did, I might have missed the whole thing, even though it was already gone. I kept looking over in that direction, somewhat out of curiosity, but also out of the sense of caution, because it had been dead silent all that time, and then something large suddenly made noises by running across the road like that. There was no one and nothing else around, so it was a little unsettling. I kept looking there just in case I'd see something, but also to make sure I was not in any kind of danger. I didn't know what it was, but I started wondering why it would have been running so fast in the first place. Also, as soon as I started wondering about that, I froze up immediately, because I saw the reason for it. A huge black dog came running out of the woods. It was enormous and running in the same direction the creature ran earlier, as if it was hunting it or chasing after whatever the earlier one was. Even on all four legs, the chest of this dog was rather considerably large, given the distance I saw it from. At first it kept going without missing a step. It moved fast, but then it seemed to notice that I was there, and I saw it do something that immediately made me concerned. While it was running, it turned its head toward me and stared right at me. After seeing me, it never turned its head away from me. It had almost reached the trees the earlier creature ran into, but it slowed down instead and came to a complete stop. all while still looking at me. Then it turned its entire body around in my direction to face me. I was scared to see it do that, and did not move an inch. It stayed where it was, staring at me, and I kept looking back at it, still not moving a muscle. It's like I was thinking it would leave me alone if I didn't move, even though, on some level, I was keenly aware of the fact that the whole reason it even stopped running in the first place was because it noticed I was there. That still did not prevent me from hoping it would just go away and leave me alone. Unfortunately, that's not how things turned out. It waited a second or two, then started moving toward me. That made me panic. I stood up immediately. As soon as it saw me do that, it stopped moving. It continued to stare at me, and waiting a second or two again. Then it stood up on its hind legs. That was absolutely horrifying to see because of how tall it looked. I was stunned, and I was feeling a whole new level of fear. I didn't have a chance to put the tools away, but I had already finished changing the tire before the creature came out of the woods. The car was right there, so I could have just moved back slowly to the driver's side and gotten back in. Problem with that was that I was mostly too scared to even move slowly. After seeing it stand up, I was too scared to move at all. The whole thing was completely unexpected, and the creature ahead of me had my full attention. It was still standing on its hind legs, but then I saw it take a step toward me, then another, and another. Then it charged at me. I cannot begin to express the full extent of fear I felt on seeing it charge me, or the sadness I felt at the brief and sudden thought I had almost died. It had no intention of leaving me alone at all. It was coming to get me. All its steps were large. With the distance it crossed with just one step and how fast it moved, I thought it would reach me before I could get back into my car. But that was the only thing I could try doing if I wanted to survive. I didn't have any weapons or any way to defend myself against it. I had a passing thought where it occurred to me to grab one of the tools I had used to change the tire, but I didn't think any of those tools would help me much or be of any use at all against this creature. I also knew I didn't have time to put the tools away, and I had to abandon them on the side of the road while I scrambled to get back onto the driver's side. It was the worst thing that was happening. This creature was closing the gap between itself and me very quickly. It was moving so fast, I ran, rushing to get to the car. I opened the door and got in, started the car, and drove off as fast as I could. I looked for the creature to see where it was and realized it was running right beside my car, along the left side rear, and almost in a blind spot. I was still accelerating and gaining speed, but it was able to run alongside the car. It was still running on two legs all that time, and it was towering over my car as it did so. It was extremely tall and looked very formidable. I thought it was an enormous dog earlier, but when it was that close, I could see that only its head and lower body made it look like a dog. It looked like its upper body was more like a human's, but very brawny and heavily muscled. Its upper body was also bigger than a human's would be, with longer arms. It ran up to my window, but then it moved several feet away. That made it possible for me to see its face. If it was running right outside of my door, I would have had to shift in my seat and strain to look up at its face, but I was able to see its face because it moved away like that and looked at me while it was running. I looked up at its face, but I wish I had not done that because it was looking right at me, and I ended up looking right into its eyes. All of its fangs, teeth were bared. Its face was furious, but the worst part was its eyes. There was so much fury in them. It was absolutely horrifying to look at those eyes. I had the clear and unmistakable understanding that it had no intention whatsoever of letting me escape. If anything had happened differently earlier, not being able to change the tire in time, not getting in the car in time, not knowing how to change a tire in the first place, not having a spare, or any similar such a thing, would have caused a delay, or that would have caused me to be stuck back there on the road. Then it would have caught me and killed me already. That's what I saw, what I knew to be true when I looked into those eyes. It ran alongside the car the entire time I was accelerating. My only hope was to speed up enough. I crossed 40, then 50, then 60 miles an hour and kept going, but it showed no signs of slowing down. I kept accelerating the whole time and would look back and forth from the road to make sure that I was staying on the road and also see if it was slowing down at all, but it wasn't. It kept running alongside the car. Almost every time I looked at it, I would either see it already looking at me, or I would see it turn to look at me with its fangs and teeth on display, and with those eyes just filled with fury. Things continued this way, but then it unexpectedly turned and ran off into the trees on the side of the road, closer to where it was. I don't know why, but I looked ahead of me again and saw that some vehicles were now visible and approaching from the distance on the opposite side of the road. I didn't know if it was related to the other people being there and approaching, even if they were in their vehicles, or if it was because the trees it ran off into were the last ones visible close to the road for a while. Since I first saw that creature, and up until that point it ran off, I had been driving through an area with trees close on both sides of the road, but now I was about to drive into a part of the road where the lines of trees on both directions moved further out and away from the road, regardless of what the actual reason was. That was the last I saw of this creature. I've had many years since then to reflect on what happened that day. In the beginning, it wasn't possible to even think about it without becoming overwhelmed with terror at the mere memory of it. I needed a lot of time to come to terms with that experience. That still hasn't happened fully, but after enough time passed, I did start finding it possible to think about what happened to me in some depth and with some degree of control over the terror I would feel every time I thought about this creature. When it stood up on its hind legs back at that time, the creature was the scariest thing in the world, especially at that moment that I saw it taking steps towards me. If I had hesitated or delayed getting back into the car, I think I wouldn't have had a chance of getting away from it and getting back into my car in time. If I had fumbled the keys when I was inside of the car, or if the car didn't start for any reason, then considering how strong it looked, it could have probably torn the door right off the car and pulled me out. I've thought about this a lot regarding why it would have got up on its hind legs. It's true that it was originally running on 4, but then it went out of its way to stand up on 2 when it came after me, and it stayed on 2 for the rest of the time it was chasing me. It seems that it could have just come after me on all 4 instead of taking the time to stand up and then charging at me on 2. It was without a doubt a predator, and maybe it stood up to appear even more intimidating, especially after it saw me stand up. When I was on the ground by my car, and it was still on 4 legs, it looked like it would have been taller than me. My standing up may have appeared to change that, and it may have thought I was showing hostility or challenging it. It then showed itself to be much taller than me in reality by standing up. In fact, it looked like it would have been several feet taller than anyone I've ever met. I say this even taking into account the fact that things look smaller when further away, so it had to be considerably tall to stand up as high as it did, even at that distance that I saw it from. I also think that that creature may have been familiar with people to some extent. It might have known exactly what kind of effect it would have on me if I saw it stand up first, before it proceeded to come after me on 2. It was scary enough seeing this huge dog, but it was horrifying to see it stand up and start charging me on its hind legs, with it being enough to tower over me, and with it looking as formidable as it did. It's also possible that it saw I was outside of my car, so it may have understood that it would have had to use its hands at some point if it caught up to me while I was in the car, but before I was able to start driving away. That could have been a likely reason, and that could also mean it was familiar with both people and with the way we get in out of our cars. Even ordinary animals can recognize as much, though for the most part ordinary animals are usually unable to easily do something as simple as open a car door to follow people in without the use of hands. I am aware that some animals can be trained to open car doors, while other animals, including wild bear, can figure out on their own how to operate a car door, but it's still much easier to do it with hands. In that case, standing up when it did might have been more efficient because, after all, it had a human-like upper body, including arms and what looked like hands, and it could run very fast, whether on four or two, faster than any human could run for certain, but it would need its hands to open the door if it was able to get to me before I could get to the car and move away. If that really was the reason, then that also implies it would have been familiar enough with people to have predicted what I would do. That, to me, could mean that it had gone after someone else before, someone who was in their car. That's a horrible thing to consider, and it would not have surprised me if it turned out to be true, because I am entirely convinced that it had no intention of letting me leave that place alive. This whole ordeal effectively turned me into a nervous wreck for the longest time. Nightmares of the creature continued for me every night since then, although they've reduced both in intensity and frequency over the years. For the longest time, I avoided rural roads and the countryside in general of any state that I was required to travel through. I also became deathly afraid of dogs, especially larger ones, or any kind that could even vaguely resemble or remind me of the general shape that creature I saw, or of the way it looked when it was still running on all fours, and then it turned its head to look at me. I would be unable to watch scenes in movies or on TV of any dog or wolves running, showing aggression, or showing their fangs and teeth. Another effect was that getting children to pet a dog wasn't something I ever found possible to do. These effects have lessened significantly since, but even today I avoid dogs as much as possible. I'll even keep a distance from people who are out walking dogs. I try in general to avoid being physically close to dogs as much as I can, without exception. I won't look into the eyes of any dog. I've never had any idea that an enormous dog-like creature could exist. The one I saw ended up making that become the most horrific and traumatic experience of my life. It was one thing to see it stand up and start charging me, but that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was looking at its face and then looking into its eyes closer up and knowing how close I had come to being killed. When I looked into those eyes, I knew in that moment with absolute certainty that it had no intention whatsoever of letting me leave alive. All right, folks, I hope you all enjoyed tonight's second half as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. Thank you for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that helps this channel to continue to grow and go, and what gives us all a place and a chance to share our experiences and theories judgment-free, simply treated with the respect that we all deserve. Please, everyone, stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, families, and our friends. These creatures are real. They are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this information with those you love and care about, and they may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for the truth, and God bless.